Hello there, this is a video accompanying the Joomla tutorial series developing an MVC component, and this is the second video associated with this step using the language facility or language filter facility. And I'm going to cover the last couple of things that we didn't cover in the last video around categories APIs, and the revised router will take a slow walk through the code there. So if I go down to the site category list view, now this is the list view that displays the messages associated with a given category and allows us to go through the category tree there. So we've got two new things in this step on this view. The first is the category name, and the second is a list of the subcategories. And in the subcategory list, we've also got those put down as URLs so we can link through to them. And the code for that then is in our model. We've got get category name and get subcategories. And this is where we start accessing the categories API. We get our category ID from really just the input parameters, and here we are starting to get the categories information, and we do the normal thing of get instance and pass a hello world parameter to say that we want the hello world records, and J categories is defined in our API here, and this is the function that we're calling get instance. And you pass the extension, but what it doesn't tell you there is that it's a bit more complicated than that. And if we look at the code for J categories, I've got it here in Notepad++. This is the actual code from the live instance. So as you can see there in my version of Joomla, it's under libraries, legacy, categories.php, but it could be somewhere else depending on the version of Joomla. And I go down to the get instance functionality here, and you're passing the extension, and it's using that extension. It's forming the component, which in this case would be com_hello world. And then it's forming a class name from that component, starting at the fourth character or beyond the fourth character, which is going to be, in this case, hello world categories. It's going to see, does that class exist? If it doesn't, it's going to look for it in our site directory, components, hello world helpers category.php, and that's where we've actually put it. So if we look under our hello world instance, this is our site, components, hello world helpers category.php. And it tries to read it from there, but however, if the class doesn't exist after trying that file, it just returns false. So you get actually nowhere. So you have to go through this route of defining your own class associated with the categories. And that's what we've got a little later on here. And really you just define it the same way as content or something like that. You just copy the example from another component. So why does it do it this way? Well, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure, but if you look at the structure of the categories table, you may remember this is that it's partitioned. So we've got articles categories, banners categories, hello world categories. So if we go via our own class, as it were, we've got our access to this area, our partition of the table, quite nicely set off from the rest. In our code, we could be accessing both the articles categories, say, and our hello categories in the same section of code. So going via our own class does mean that it's nice and separate, and we can actually override some of the standard functions in the categories library if we go via our own class, if we want to do something special with our own partition there. So maybe that's why it's been designed like that within Joomla, although, as I'm saying, I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, getting back to here, once we go through this and we've got our own class set up, we then get our handle on the categories, and from there we can use our categories using the get function here, get, which loads a specific category. So what we do is we pass the category ID that we want, and then we end up with a category node. Sorry, I'm up here. A category node, and that's what this is here. And if you look at some of the functions here, we can get children, author, we can get the parents, and there's a whole lot of properties down the bottom, the ID, the title, alias, all the sort of things that you would expect to see. In this case, we want the title, so we're just going to return the category node title, which is one of the properties here. Similarly, we are getting the subcategories here, so we do the same sort of thing. Get instance. Now, it would obviously be a lot better to just have a static variable and not call get instance every time, but just call it the first. However, this is the way it's done here, just to make it a little bit simpler on the eye. And then we get the category node that we're interested in, and then we use this function now, get children, which gets the children of that node. And you can either get the immediate children or recursive down through the tree. And that returns us really an array, excuse me, an array of category nodes. And for each of those category nodes, we go through and just add another property. We add a URL property, which we set to be JRoot with the menu item we're on, the view equals category, and the ID that we're now considering is the subcategory ID. Subcategory ID is just, again, one of these properties, ID, and that is going to give us the set of URLs for the subcategories down here. And then in our layout file, we just output those items, category name, and the link with the subcategory URL, the subcategory title, and I've just output the description there as well. So that's that. That should be clear. So let's go on to considering the routing aspects. And if you remember, one of the routing aspects that we need to consider was whenever we go on Hello World here, if we did a search here and got other things, other Hello World records in that vicinity, we didn't want it to be hello world / goodbye world as the URL segment. So we had to change the Ajax URL, and we decided to use a, sorry, go back here. we decided to use /message URL to put those on. So whenever we come back in here, if we click on Goodbye World, we get /message here. So we're putting them on top of this hidden item. It's not visible in the menus, but it is visible in our administrator menu, of course. And it's this one here that we want. And we put a special note on it, Ajax, and that's true in each of the menus for the other languages as well, so that we could find the correct menu item depending on the type of language. So that's what our code here in our get Ajax URL has been changed to do. Now if we've gone through the messages line and we've clicked one of those, we're going to continue on that messages URL, as you can see down at the bottom here. So there's no need to do anything if we're already on the right menu item. So if we're on a menu item which has got view equals category, which is the one that I've just been displaying, or we've already found that Ajax menu item, we don't need to do anything, we can just return null. If we're not, however, if we've gone and we've clicked on Hello World and now we want to make an Ajax call, that's where we want to change it. And that's where it'll come into this bit of section of code here. And what we're doing is we're just looking for a menu item which has a language of whatever language we're on and has a note of Ajax, and doing this sort of filter should get us immediately to the right menu item, and then we set up just the URL to that menu item, and that's the Ajax URL which will pass down in the parameters to the JavaScript code, so when it makes the Ajax request it will use that URL to go back. So that's that. So finally we come to our router, and I've just put on, here the parameters, and we'll walk through this fairly slowly just to make sure it's all clear. Before we had this, we had our category list and we had our Hello World message for the case where you go in initially via Hello World. Now we've got an additional thing to consider, is our Hello World category list displaying categories. Remember, we have to write a custom router if we're displaying things like these sorts of things here which don't have a specific menu item dedicated to them. So they're going to come through as overrides to the existing menu item. So in this case we've got the messages is the menu item, but we're kind of using that again and overriding it with a separate category, and the different category that we're using is this 38 formal. So if we go back to our categories, you'll see that. Here's our categories. Here's this formal one here that I just mentioned. If you look over the right hand side, its ID is 38. So let's look at these one by one. The first is we're using the Hello World category list and we want to output the messages on it. So we're looking at this area here, these messages, these URLs. So in this case, if we look at the menu item, let's look at that menu item first of all. here we are here. Sorry, here we are here. So it's a menu item of 822 in my system. It'll be different in yours, obviously. If I click on it, you'll see I've just put a dummy category, and it's the messages category. It has to be the messages category, which is ID 37. So that's what we've got here. The ID is 822. Over here to the right, 822. Its view equals category, and its default is ID equals 37. And an example of where we're going to change that is for example, go down to informal and high, just pick that. And in this case, let me go back and I'll just put this on to non-SEF and you'll see the IDs coming. Messages, informal, and we're looking at this one high. So you can see there the various parameters that we're going to be set. ID equals 126 colon high. So we're passing in now the ID followed by the alias, category ID of 39, and it's going to be on the same item ID. So if we look at that here, here's our ID of 126 high, category 39, and what we want to transform that to is we want to output a category tree. So we want to go 37 messages, 39 informal, and these are the IDs and aliases of the messages in the tree down to this item here. So let's have a look at that in the router. So if we look at our router code, remember when we call jroot, that will result in a call to our build function here, and we'll get passed in the query parameters that are set here, and what we must return are the segments of the URL. So at this outset we're doing some things, just making sure things are set up correctly. We're looking, does this menu item that we're on have a note of Ajax? And this is the menu item we're looking at here. So this isn't the menu item with Ajax on it. So we're going to come down here. Assume we're on the messages menu item. And in this case, what we're passing through is we're passing through a view hello world because we want this to display a hello world record whenever we click on it. So we'll come down to here, and it just makes sure that we've got a category and ID there. Now this is where we start to build the URL, and what I've done here is just create a little function, get category segments, and you can see it down here. So again, we do the same sort of thing. We get a handle on the JCategory stuff via the same mechanism. We get the category node associated with the ID that's passed in, and then we call this function this time, category node get path, and this is down here. Returns a category path. Again, it doesn't tell you really what a category path is, but a category path is really what we're going to end up with when we set this up. So I'll just turn back SEF back on. and just reload this page, and you can see here and this is basically the category path, because what we do in our router is really just return that path, and then if we go back here, just set the, well, it's called path segments here, and just set the segments to be that same variable. So we're basically using this path that we get from getPath on the category node in question, and we're just setting that up as the URL, set of URL segments. So that's what we end up with. That's what the path is there. Now if we go back and look at the other thing we've got here is the subcategories. Now in the case of subcategories, we're using the same menu item down here. So it's got the same default parameters associated with it. But what we're going to do now is we're going to pass in different parameters here. So in this case, if we're calling a clicking on something like this, we still want this same view displayed. So we're going to be still using the view category. And then we're going to be passing in the ID of the category. Now in this case up here, because we're displaying hello world, the ID refers to the hello world record. Down here, the ID refers to the category record. And what we're wanting to end up with is a similar sort of thing, but it's just the category tree. And we're not going to bother, well, we don't have any hello world record to add on at the end. So let's look at that in our code. And in this case, what we find is that we end up here, a view equals category, and we do the same sort of thing, get category segments, and we just set the path segments. I'm just conscious that I probably used that as the example in the last one. In the last one where we've got view equals hello world, we get the category segments, and then at the end we add on another segment, which is really just going to be the query ID. And if you remember, in this case, the ID passed is ID:alias. And you're going to get the ID:alias at the end. So that's building up the URLs. However, we also have to consider the parsing. So whenever we click on one of these or on a subcategory, we need to make sure that we're able to parse. That is, go from the URL segments to the view and the IDs that we need set up for our code. So the difference coming in with within the parse area is we're not on the Ajax stuff, but we don't have a clear way of distinguishing these two URLs. So in each case, we've just got kind of like a series of numbers and labels, but we can't be sure at the outset, is the last one an article or an item, or is it a category? So we have to be a bit more careful and go through the category trees and work out, does this refer to a category at the end, or does it refer to an item? So we again go through our method of getting a categories object, so we can get the category nodes. We start then at the top. So we look at for the category node, which really is at the top. And I'm just calling that matching category. And as we go down, this matching category is going to get updated, because what we're going to do is for each, we're going to find the get children. We're going to get the children of that category. And then I've written just a little function match, which goes through those category nodes, which are the children, and looks for one which matches our segment. So if there's one there that's got an ID : alias of the form which is in our segment, which is this up here, then that's the one we take. And we do that repeatedly. And as we go through and we find a match, we check, well, is this the last match of all? Have we actually exhausted all the segments? And if we've exhausted all the segments, we can say, oh, well, we'll just set the view to be that category and the ID to be that category ID associated with that category node. If we don't get a match, but we find, well, this is the last segment that we're considering anyway, then we take the last one as a hello world record, and we set up the view to be hello world, and we set the ID of the hello world record just to be that segment. And remember, the segment is going to be this section here, so it is going to include both the ID and the alias. But remember that because we're using in our code, we're using a get, and we're expecting an int, we're passing an int to get the ID in our code. Joomla very kindly forgets about this second bit and just gives us the ID. So that works okay. So that covers the two of the aspects, and the third aspect is when we are on our special hello world / message menu item. Remember, this is the hidden one. So if we look at this case and we look at our menus, that's this one here. Its ID is 824, ID 824, and if we look at its parameters, I've just set in an ID of 43, and it doesn't really matter what that is because it's not shown as a menu item anyway, and the ID is going to get overridden. But of course the view has to be the view equals hello world. And then when we get our results back from Ajax, we're going to have a number of different item IDs. And again, we're passing in the ID in the form 126 : alias, ID : alias. It's going to be a hello world view because we're going to be displaying a hello world record. And we're going to be passing in a category ID as well, because really both of these two cases here come from the same functionality. It's both coming from our get. Find what it is. It's in our model. Hello world.php. It's this function. It's get map search results, which is giving us back this. So we find that because this is working with both the messages and with our special Ajax call, then we get the category ID as well. And we want to end up with this sort of format. So no category tree, just the ID and the alias of the hello world record. And if we go back to our code in our router, well, if it's on this Ajax special menu item, we just check the parameters and we just set the segment to be the query ID. And we need to make sure that we unset both of those IDs that are passed in. And similarly on our parse if it's again the active menu item is has a note of Ajax, then we just set the IDs from the segment, the ID from the segment, and we set the view to be hello world. So hopefully that's fairly clear. In terms of suggestions, what you might like to try yourself, I've got a couple. One is you could try on the category view, add a link back up to the parent. So if you go here on messages, you'll see that you can go down through the tree, but there's no way of getting back up. So you might like to try that, putting a link back up to the parent category. Again, you'd be using some of the get parent, for example. It'll give you details of the parent category. The other suggestion I have is if you look at these URLs that we've really got messages here, which comes from the menu item, and then we've got 37:messages here, which comes from the top category node. So what you could do is you could first of all remove all of these numbers here from the URL segments. That's a possible one thing. And you could actually remove the extra messages URL segment. So I'll show you what it looks like. In point of fact, I originally developed the tutorial code using this really to make the URLs a lot nicer, but the kind of router.php code came out, I thought, a bit too complex for the tutorial. So I'm really leaving it as an exercise that you may want to try and see if you can get this to work. But what you will find then, if you go to messages, you find that as you go down through them here, you don't have the extra messages segment to the URL. So here's our tree here, and if we go down to about ye, here's our messages menu item, but we haven't got a messages one in the tree, and we've taken the numbers off both the categories and the IDs. So you might want to try that. It is fairly tricky, but if you really want to find out, you can always sign up to help with Joomla docs, and you then get a history, and you can go back to find where it was originally in the tutorial. Okay, that's about it. Hope you find that interesting. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.